Good morning and welcome back to another OC Tax Talk. In honor of my good friend Senator Morlock, I am wearing no socks, which you will see later in the broadcast. We have a very special guest right in the middle of summer before we jump into what my husband likes to call the silly season. Registrar Voter Neal, thank you so much for being here today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm sure it's hard to get away right now.
It's a little busy.
A little busy. So, well, welcome to Tax Talk.
Thank
we
you.
have a whole list of questions. I know that when unfortunately you were ill last time and we had to postpone, we had a lot of comments on just like, no, we have questions for him. Because the new system that is in place is a big change. But before I jump into that, I want to let you just talk a little bit about yourself, because I don't think people know what an amazing and prestigious registrar of voters we have here in Orange County.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Yeah, I have an unusual background, I think, for most registrar voters up and down the state. A lot of folks kind of climb up through the ranks, you know, to become registrar. I joined the county, I was in the private sector for 20 plus years and ran my own company and had a number of employees, made a payroll.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and so I joined the county after I sold my business back in 2004. And I had run for office before, so I was on the other side of the counter. And I had this kind of really strong background in marketing and organizational behavior, you know, those kinds of things. And so, yeah, I joined the county back in 2004, and about a year later, the county made a change and I became registrar of voters pretty quickly. And have my MBA from USC, have my undergrad from University of Redlands. So
you can hear the fight on yelling out in the audience right now. So,
so it's a varied background. It really helps me to do my business, I think, much more effectively in what I do. For instance, having a background in finance and economics, et cetera, that really helps you on the budget side.
Of course.
So at any rate, that's kind of my background.
But I'm surprised that I didn't know all this about you, but it makes perfect sense because I have always found, as an elected official myself, having to make many trips down to the Santa Ana office, I've always been impressed with the efficiency in which you run your office.
Thank you.
And it does have a very entrepreneurial, small business feel that, you know, how you deal with customers. I mean, I think you can really see that when you walk into the office.
I appreciate that. I'm not a fan of red tape. I will be the first to tell folks, look, if we can find a better way to do it, we're going to look for it. So thank you for the comments. I appreciate that.
Well, and speaking of which, you know, now on top of everything else, whole new system this year.
Yes.
So, which people premiered during the primaries. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I know there's concerns, but it was a big change for you to implement.
It was. So we moved to what's called the Voters' Choice Act, which essentially does away with neighborhood polling places and consolidates them into larger vote centers. And on top of that, every voter gets a ballot. The beauty of the system, in my opinion, this is what we really saw in March, is you can go anywhere to vote now.
Right.
You don't have to be tied to your home precinct. So that eliminates provisional ballots.
Okay.
You know, it really speeds up the process on the back end. And it was well received. I mean, when you look at our county to the north and you know how that went, I think we had an excellent rollout of the new system. I was very pleased.
Even when you look across the country and people were online for hours and hours and hours, that's not happening here.
Correct. And you know, the vote by mail piece, you know, that was a lot of concern that people had, and I understand that. We worked really hard to keep those rolls as clean as we can. And I can talk a little bit further about that.
I think that's one of our questions.
Good. But the reality is 82% of our voters used a vote by mail ballot. And so they chose to vote at home. So my hope is in the fall, because of everything related to COVID and what's going on, that we're going to see that climb even higher.
Well, and we know it's going to be a big election season all the way around.
Yeah.
So a presidential always is.
Yeah.
So what did you see that was anything that concerned you that you're already tweaking based on March?
Well, we're looking for larger sites. I think some of the sites that we ended up with were too small, and you know that causes crowding. I mean, especially in this environment now, we have to worry about that. I think that, and there's going to be some changes related to what voters can do under the COVID environment, and we're going to expand, for instance, our online capabilities for people to download a ballot if they want to do that.
Oh, interesting.
And that's going to open up to everybody. So there's going to be some changes in that regard. I think one of the things we're going to continue to work on is line management and keeping people in the flow moving. Overall, though, it went really well.
Well, we'll have to talk to some of our friends over at Disney.
That's right. Yeah.
Nobody knows how to run a line better than they do.
Yeah.
So with that, you know, until you kind of alluded to it, we're living in a COVID environment.
Mm-hmm.
What other precautions are you having to look at to keep people safe? Not only the voter, but your own staff.
Sure, it's a heavy lift. I mean, the regulations that have come down from both the state and the local side are pretty strong. But we want to just do a good job of keeping voters safe as well as my staff safe at the same time. So we're implementing things, for instance, like when voters come in, we're going to provide them with a mask. They don't have to wear one. That's not required. But we're going to provide it for them if they'd like to. We also have sanitizing stations. We have a lot of work going into plexiglass and things that we're putting in to separate voters. There's going to be more room in between the voting booths so that people will have space in that regard. Just a lot of cleaning protocols, disinfecting, and making sure that people stay distant.
So for the first time in my life, I voted by mail in this last election. So does all this mean that the classic cardboard mailing booth is gone? And
no, that's a good point. I mean,
if you go to the centers,
there's still people that like to. Well, you're talking about the cardboard, yeah. So we've gotten rid of those.
Okay.
You now have a plastic voting booth.
Gotcha.
But to your point, I think we're seeing more people that are engaging in vote by mail, and as I mentioned, 82% in March used vote by mail. I'd love to see that go to 95% in November, just because of the safety issues.
Sure.
But there's still people that like to vote in person, and we're going to be there to service them.
Okay. So you mentioned this, you kind of touched on this about purging the rolls. What is your process for that, and how often does it happen?
So we are the only California county that uses third-party data. And I actually worked on changing the law several years ago to allow us to do that.
What does that mean when you say third party?
Right. So what happens currently in California is when registrars are cleaning their rolls, it's really done through the National Change of Address system, which is when you go into the post office and you move, you fill out that card, and you pick up those change of address forms from that, and DMV. So when you move, and your driver's license, we pick up that information too.
So again, I heard a lot of people groaning out there on the DMV. So, okay.
Yeah, and there's been some challenges with that DMV data, and we've been working pretty closely with the state on that. Okay. And I think they've done a good job getting that fix in place. But
there's no wood to knock on, so I'm going to take your word.
But I can't just rely on that data, right? There's so many people that move that do not tell anybody that they've moved. The last thing they think about is telling the registrar of voters they've moved. They're going to say their magazine subscription's updated before that. So we use third-party data which picks up moves off of financial transactions. So we don't get any of the financial transaction information, but let's say you go to an apartment complex and you apply for a new apartment. You fill out the application. Sure. That gets us a hit that you might be moving into that apartment complex. So we are chasing the voter and chasing them down before they can tell us.
Okay.
That, and to answer your question, we do it about 90 days before the election. We're already starting that process now to run that data. And because of what we're doing with that, I believe, and if you look at the data, it tells you that we have one of the cleanest rolls in the state. There's still, voter databases are the hardest to maintain.
Right.
And the reason for that is it's one of the few government databases that you're not required to tell me when you move.
Okay.
The law doesn't require it. So we're always chasing people down, and that's tough.
Well, and I would imagine too that with the changes just with that and changes with mailing and how you're doing voting, there was a whole traditional system, a whole apparatus for campaigns, candidates, campaign managers. Okay, I know when absentee ballots are going, I'm going to send something. How has that changed? Because I know it seems for some people perplexing, this is all new.
So because of this new system, it's actually, I think, a much better system for candidates. And the reason for that is it's all electronic now. So for instance, when we start the voting in-person period, you as a candidate can get that data electronically in real time. So if your friend goes in to vote in a vote center, it's going to be picked up and you're going to see instantly that that person's already voted.
Through your website,
through our website, through the data. And you also see on the absentee side, if you're doing absentee chasers, you see when they returned the ballot, you see when the ballot was mailed, and it's all electronic now. It's just much easier to campaign, in my opinion.
Just using that technology to enhance that.
And we had a lot of people use that in March, which was great.
So let me ask you about this, because this was so interesting to me, and this is a personal, just a little anecdote. Mm-hmm. So we've always told our kids, you want to stay in the house, you got to register to vote. So everybody votes. Right. We got our ballots in the mail. We did them together as a family. Mm-hmm. All sent them in. my youngest sons came back,
Uh-huh.
and it came back just a few weeks ago, and it said that they could not verify his signature, which, if you've seen a millennial signature lately, it can look different no matter on just the day of the week.
Right.
But what are some advice you can give about that? Because you may not remember what kind of signature you did.
Yeah. The good thing about our system is for voters that have been around a little bit longer, we have historical signatures. So we can go in and we can view those.
See many versions.
Exactly. But you're right. Millennial signatures, my kids are millennials, and
handwriting's not like a big thing anymore, right?
They scribble, The other problem and challenge is that a lot of our signatures now are through the DMV.
Oh,
so when you go into DMV and get a driver's license and you sign that PIN pad,
right,
that's the signature we're getting.
Oh,
and sometimes it's a challenge to be able to match that to the voter registration record. So my advice is always, if you think about how you signed your name on your registration document, do the same thing all the way through, right?
Okay.
For your driver's license, for whatever else you do that are government documents, just sign it the same way. But your son should have gotten an updated form so we can get.
He did.
Good.
We've held it just because I knew that you were coming in.
Good.
And you were coming in a couple, and I was going to ask you, what do we do?
Yep.
So this is perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
So we'll update the signature and it'll be attached to his record.
Well, and he can look at his driver's license and make sure it's right.
That's right.
So, okay, well, let's move on to, we have a lot of questions yet, and I know that questions are coming through. So if you have a question for our registrar voter, please use the comments section on Facebook. And those will be texted to me so that I can share them with Neal and hopefully get your answers. So please join the conversation. We have lots of other new things, particularly about what the governor has kind of dictated at this point. So tell me a little bit about the new laws requiring election officials to mail ballots to everyone. Now, we're already ahead of that?
We are. So because we're a Voters' Choice Act county, we're already mailing ballots to everybody. So that has no effect on us.
Okay.
But it does have an effect on the other counties in California that have never done it. For instance, Los Angeles County, San Diego, these are going to be big mailings that have not occurred throughout the state. So what will have more of an effect on us is SB 423, which is a bill that has not moved yet. It's moving. That would change the in-person components. So it would go from us doing an 11-day period probably down to 4 or 5 days instead of 11 days.
Okay.
And it also opens up the remote vote by mail system. So if a voter doesn't get their ballot, we can send them online and they can download their ballot.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Now, is that why it seems like it's taken a while to get like election certified? I noticed in March that we were waiting and waiting, and for those of us who are wonky enough to sit there and refresh your site every other, a couple times a day to see where things have moved. Is that what just lengthens that period of time to get all the votes in?
It's voters. And I love our voters, but what voters are doing in their behavior is they're waiting to drop their ballot off at the last minute, especially in a primary, because candidates are changing in the primary, and a lot of them wanted to wait and see what candidates were going to be left by the time they went in to cast their ballot. You won't see that as much in the November election. I think people are going to vote more, they're going to vote earlier, especially in generals. But we've reduced our back-end time. Okay. So if you don't have voters dropping off the last minute, that's what extends it on the back end. If a lot of people vote early in November, we're going to be caught up and we're going to have that election certified much earlier.
And what is the number of days past the election? Because I know that there's election day, but there's still time to put in.
30. Well, it's 30 days for us to certify.
Right.
But for voters, and that will be one of the things that might change in SB 423, voters will have extended times to be able to get their ballot in. They still have to mail it by election day, but it could arrive in my office weeks later.
Oh my.
Right, because they don't, postal delays and things like that, they're worried about on the COVID side. And so that's one of the things they might be changing too.
And is the thought right now that will change ahead of election day this year?
Yeah.
Oh my. Okay.
And
well,
it would be
that makes your job even more fun, right?
Well, yeah. And I always get the question, like, why in California does it take so long? The reason is there's so much volume. And if you are dropping it off on election day, you have to start over.
Right.
So for us, we have to start processing election day on.
So a couple of years ago, we had a huge shift in Orange County where the congressional delegation went Democratic. Not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying it happened. But when that happened, it was one of the first times we saw, and then the term became ballot harvesting. So is that still something that we're probably going to be seeing in this upcoming election?
Yes, and I want to give you a little background on that.
Okay.
When I was the president of our statewide association, that bill came up, and I was public about not being a fan of it. I'm not a fan of ballot harvesting. But what I've seen anecdotally, there's a lot of things out on the internet about people harvesting. The reality is, I think the number's lower than people think.
Okay.
Because think about it, as a voter, if someone knocks on your door,
especially now,
right? Your ballot's precious to you,
right?
And most people aren't going to hand over their ballot. We're seeing that.
Okay.
Now, in the instances where they do, yes, the law allows you to do that. It allows any third party to do that. And the thing in California, unlike Colorado, for instance, there's no limit on the number of ballots you can do it with.
Oh.
In Colorado, it's 10.
Oh. Okay.
So in California, it's unlimited. And that's obviously a concern for people, but the reality is it's baked into statute and it's here.
Yeah, so we're not going to see that going away anytime soon.
No.
So those are just all new strategies that campaigns need to think about and that you need to deal with.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how about, I know there's a lot of concern, not about COVID, but just about the safety of your ballot and the voter information. What are you doing? What kinds of steps are you taking in the background for that?
We have been a very strong partner with the FBI and Homeland Security.
Wow.
And our local law enforcement fusion center. And I can tell you that work goes on every week. In fact, we just had a meeting of the FBI, DHS, myself, and our law enforcement fusion center last week. And that work has been going on for a couple of years now. I can tell you in the back end, there's a tremendous amount that has been done on the network side to add additional protections, on the chain of custody side, on the voter records themselves. I can just say this, and I really mean it. I think Orange County has one of the safest systems in the state based on the work that we're doing.
And I know that there's been a lot of media attention on vulnerabilities within the voter rolls, but from what you're saying, it sounds like that's a primary concern. You're working on it all the time.
Absolutely, and I think we need to all acknowledge that any human-built system is going to have vulnerabilities, and it's how you patch that and how you maintain that that's really important.
Do you have one person dedicated through?
Oh, I have multiple people that are dedicated to that. Yeah, but I have one
just looking at that all the time.
I have one person focused on election security. He's kind of the lead.
Okay.
But we're all involved in it. I mean, I'm involved in those meetings every week that we do them. So.
And when and this actually the first question is coming from Carolyn herself.
Great.
So always fun to know that she's watching us.
Yeah.
So besides just the technical aspect of it, when we're talking about the voters putting in the signatures we just spoke about earlier, what are you doing to verify those signatures besides just to make sure that the person who is voting is in fact the actual voter?
So it's under the law, it's really a layman's view of the signature. In other words, it's not a forensic examination, right? So it's done pretty quickly, comparing the voter record to what's on the envelope. And if we don't see a match, then it goes to an escalation. So we go through 3 steps. And if it gets to the third team and they don't see a match, then the letter goes out.
Okay.
And it used to be in the past that ballot wouldn't count. But under new laws in California, we have to reach out to the voter and they have an opportunity to cure that before Election Day. So we see a lot of people that are curing it.
Right.
Yeah.
And how many people did that happen in March, since that's the first time?
Yeah, I don't have the data right in front of me, but it was a couple thousand.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it was a few thousand.
But out of how many voters?
800,000 cast ballots in March.
So not bad. And then you spend that time whittling that down.
We do.
Wow, that's amazing.
We do.
So there have been opponents who have state California ballot harvesting systems. Oh, well, we just talked about that. So it's just kind of another take on that. In a tweet last month, President Donald Trump criticized an expanded vote by mail system as an unnecessary vulnerability to foreign interference and supported the claim that it's ripe for fraud. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't want to get into the politics of that, but I will tell you this, that I think it's foolhardy for any election official to discard those comments. I think we need to continue to work on security related to mail balloting. But I will tell you this, in my opinion, mail balloting is safer than in-person voting because there's no ID checks in California. We don't have that. There's no signature comparison in in-person voting. It's not allowed.
Right. We used to have that way back when.
Long before my time.
Right. I was going to say, when I first started voting, moons ago. I do remember having to show my ID, but yes, in the last several, like at least decade, you haven't had to do that.
Yeah, it's forbidden in California law.
Okay.
And so, in my opinion, mail balloting is a better way to go because we at least have those checks and balances that I don't have in in-person voting.
Okay.
So, that's my personal opinion.
There you go.
And I believe when you look at what the system is and the checks that we do put in place, it's about as secure as you can get with a human-built system.
Okay. The Republican National Committee has now instituted a lawsuit against the California Republican Party, and the lawsuit is against Governor Newsom and for mandating ballot voting. Do you agree with that, or can you speak a little bit more about that lawsuit?
Well, I can tell you that lawsuit's kind of moot right now because what happened after that lawsuit was filed, the legislature came in and passed a bill that did the same thing that the governor did in an executive order.
Okay.
So, I mean, obviously the court needs to handle, can the governor create law through an executive order? That's a separate issue.
Right.
But now that the legislature's done it, it's kind of moot.
Okay.
In my opinion.
So in addition to mandatory ballots, the governor has stated, I guess it's stated counties must have in-person voting at least 3 days before the election. We go slightly longer than that, don't we?
We do, and like I was saying, that SB 423 will be that vehicle that will replace his executive order. And I think what you're going to see up and down the state is a mix. It'll be a minimum of 4 days is what's currently in the bill. Election day plus 3.
Okay.
And I'm probably going to end up extending that by a couple of days. So what I want to do, when you look at the data from March, it's very clear. Voters did not use vote centers until that weekend before Election Day.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And the data from Colorado, which has been doing they've been doing vote centers now for 10 years, same exact thing.
Interesting.
And it hasn't changed in 10 years.
Wow,
so voter behavior is they wait until that weekend and then they go in and they vote in large numbers.
Probably kind of like taxes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So everyone's just doing it like online, by mail, whatever, until that like final push.
Yeah.
And then it's panic.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I have a responsibility, like I said, to keep our voters safe and my staff. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to have these vote centers when nobody's using them.
Right.
So we're going to kind of, go where the data is.
Well, and I remember before we moved to vote by mail, it was starting to get very difficult to find the volunteers you needed to staff all of those.
Yes.
That was one of my very first entrees into political life was I worked for the Registrar of Voters and I manned a center, and we had like 7 people there.
Yeah.
I think the last couple of times I went to a polling place, you were lucky to see 2 or 3.
It has been really tough because as a lot of those folks have retired out of the system, we're not seeing people volunteering like they used to in the past. But under our new system, they're employees. So I don't have to go out and get volunteers. Well,
so employees, so that means big money. So let's talk about that for a minute. From moving from one system to another, has it been a huge expense? Has that been a problem from budgeting?
That's a great question. From a budget standpoint, the big expense for us was the capital expenditure on the voting system.
Okay.
Right. So that was about $20 million. Long term, this will go down on the operational costs.
Okay.
Because we're using less sites, we're consolidated. Even though we have employees, they're not full-time county employees. You see those costs go down over time. And we'll end up saving in year 2, 3 from the launch, $200,000.
Okay.
Per election.
Per election.
Per election.
So, but with actually more security.
With more security.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you probably can't advocate one way or the other, but it's OC tax. So our obligatory question at the end of each one of these shows, and I can't believe we're already at the end of our show, is about Prop 13 and the protections of historic Prop 13. So we now have a ballot, a proposition number, so split roll, which is kind of the first shot across the bow to kind of dismantle Prop 13 is Prop 15. And I would love to hear your opinion on that proposition if you can, or just a little bit of anything you would like to say about that.
I appreciate your question. As soon as I retire from the county, I will give you my opinion on that.
As a former businessman, I'm sure you have lots of opinions. So,
I do.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that.
I dodged that question, Bona.
Is there we have a few minutes left where we just have a couple of minutes, but anything you'd like to talk about that you'd like people to know?
Yeah, I want to get the word out to consider voting at home.
Okay.
And I know there's a lot of dialogue and debate about vote by mail balloting, and I understand that. We're focused on doing our best to protect that. But in this environment right now, you have that opportunity to vote at home safely. And I would really encourage people to do that and to consider it.
Now, with that, is there, looking at the process a ballot takes, is there one that you would recommend over another? Is it best to vote at home and then take that ballot and put it in your mailbox? Is it better to take it to the box? I know there's a box sitting right down the street, which I just noticed the other day. Or is it better to drop it off at a vote center? What is the most?
I think it's personal preference, but I will tell you from an administrative standpoint, if you drop it in the drop box, it's picked up the same day. If you drop it in the mail system, that can take multiple days.
Sure.
And you are also delivering it directly to the election official. There was a lot of talk about drop boxes when we first launched them, but they've been well received, and we had 150,000 voters use them in March for the first time.
Wow.
So I think we're going to see that grow for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking your time on a Monday morning. And for our guests, thank you so much for joining us once again for OC Tax Talk. We will be back next week. I think we have 2 more to go. Oh, no, I'm sorry, just 1 more to go for this whole series. And that will be with Todd Ahmet, who's the head of the Chamber of Greater Anaheim. So we're excited to hear about what's going on in Anaheim because there's big things coming and changing. So we look forward to having you back. Thank you for joining us. If you have any other comments, you still can leave them in the Facebook and we will pass them along to Mr. Kelley and see if just bother you some more. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.